want to dig into this thing that Jesus tells us to do in our reading this morning, to store up treasures in heaven. What does that mean? If I were to ask you, can you describe that in one or two sentences? What does it mean to store up treasures in heaven? I've got an idea, and I'll kind of share my thoughts on it at the end of the message, but I think it's something for all of us to ponder and to think about what Jesus is trying to get us to understand when he says that. Store up treasures in heaven. As we look at the gospel reading for this morning, we have to be struck with this idea of money and possessions. And the gospel message this morning, Jesus tells us to sell our possessions and give to the needy. Sell our possessions, sell our stuff, sell the things that we've worked hard for, the things that we've earned. Jesus tells us to sell that and give to the needy. How good are we at doing that? Some of us probably feel a little bit better about that than others. Did you know that Jesus talks more about money? And this comes as a shock to many people. Jesus talks more about money than he does any other topic. Anything else. He talks more about money than he even talks about heaven, which is surprising. He talks more about money than he talks about hell and the dangers of hell. Jesus will tell 39 parables, these stories, these magnificent stories that Jesus tells us that has a deeper truth to them. And out of the 39 parables Jesus tells, 11 of them have to do with money. And I think it's because Jesus knows the trappings of our own hearts. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, pretty much everybody here, we struggle with this. I know I do. We worry about money. We think about our money. We think about our retirement accounts. We watch the stock market go up and down. We like to think about how much money do I need to buy, the next whatever it might be, that it can encompass our lives so much that it becomes our first priority. And I think Jesus is trying to get us to see that trappings in so much of our lives, money. Jesus tells us to sell our possessions and give to the needy. As I hear our Lord say this, I'm reminded of back when I was 20 years old. I was a junior at the University of Nebraska. And I had, I believe, 2 or 3 months just prior, really felt that calling from the Lord to go to seminary, to give my life, to become a pastor, to do things like stand before you here on Sunday mornings, to preach the gospel, to be honored to do what I do. And I felt such a huge calling that God and Jesus was so much in my life. I was on fire for the Lord. I was so excited to do God's work. I couldn't wait to go to seminary one day. 20-year-old me, I'm walking out of a big student union, we call it, where there's restaurants and there's different types of classrooms that people could go to. I was walking out of this great big building, and I see a car slowly start to pull up on the street. And I see a man get out of his car, and he locks eyes with me, and he walks straight up to me. He looks me in the eye and says, "Sir, I need some help." He begins to describe that he and his brother had traveled to Lincoln from St. Louis, that their mom was in the hospital, she had cancer, and they had somehow made their way out to Lincoln just by, the very nick of their resources, but they had no money to buy gas to get back home. I felt God calling me in that moment. I had gospel messages like this: sell my possessions and give to the needy. I felt like that was a moment that I could step up and I could help a fellow human being. I felt God's good and holy call in that moment. So what I did, I took out my wallet and And I was a 20-year-old kid, so I think I maybe had $2 in my wallet. I looked sheepishly at him, but then I realized I also had a debit card in my wallet. And I explained to him, if you just give me about 5 minutes, I'll go back into the student union and I'll withdraw some money. So I go back in, I'm feeling really good about myself. You know, I'm doing the Lord's work, and I thought I'm going to give him a $20 bill. And I thought, no, Casey, you know, you can do better than that. I withdrew $40. When I walked out and I handed him the money, and he had tears streaming down his face. He gave me one of those great big hugs, and I felt good. I really felt like God was in that moment. The story doesn't end there, unfortunately. I wish that it did. A week later, the exact same thing happened. I'm walking out of the exact same building, and that exact same green car slowly pulled up. The same man gets out, and we lock eyes once again. I recognized him. He didn't recognize me. He comes up to me with the same story, and my heart dropped. And I felt used. I felt like I'd given some money to buy alcohol or I don't know what. And that's always kind of been a part of, I don't know, a part of who I am. And I wish that I could shake that moment. I wish I could somehow get beyond. I wish that that man hadn't abused that situation, but he did. And so when Jesus tells us to sell our possessions and to give to those in need, I think we all realize sometimes it's complicated, isn't it? When we want to give to those people that are in need, how do we do that? How do we make sure that when we give our resources, the things that we've worked hard for, and we want to do good things with them, how can we make sure that they're going to places where people who really are in need are getting them? I think there's a lot of wisdom around here. I think many of you have maybe had similar experiences to what I have, and I think we live in a good time, 2019, that we can give to different organizations and places where we know that when we give to them, they are being used for good purposes. We are giving to people in need. And the thing I'm thinking about this very morning, as we are gathered here this morning, you'll notice in the back of your bulletin, some of you have brought some things for this morning, but the middle schoolers here in our community, I had a teacher reach out to the churches here in town, and she said, here on page 8 is where I'm referencing here, there are about 725 middle schoolers at Taylor County. And about half of those students, half of the 725 students, come from homes and situations which would be considered situations of poverty. Homes where there aren't a lot of resources. And so this teacher, her name's Childers, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Childers is doing a remarkable thing. She's reaching out to us in the community, to the churches and the different businesses, asking us to give. And I think this is a situation where we can give, and we know it's going to a good place. These children in our community. And I hear Jesus say to us to sell our possessions and to give those who are in need. Now, what about this idea of storing up for yourselves treasures in heaven? What does Jesus mean by that? Let me ask you a question. What are we able to take from this earth into God's eternal kingdom? What are we able to take? What do you hope to take along with you? Are we able to take the clothes on our back? The shoes on our feet? The funds in our retirement account? Are we able to take anything? What does Jesus mean by storing up treasures in heaven? I've got an idea, and I think there's maybe more than one way to look at this, but I feel like I had a moment earlier this week that I stored up a little of my own treasure in heaven. I was driving down from Morgantown on Monday, and I was behind two motorcycles. We're pulling up to the Walmart traffic lights, and they were going about the right speed limit, but I thought they were just going to go right on through the yellow lights as it flashed. And they were going pretty fast, one after another. And the guy driving in front, though, at the very last second decided to brake. And unfortunately for the guy behind him, he wasn't able to brake as quickly as the guy in front of him, and they had a collision. It wasn't overly severe, but the guy sideswiped him, and the mirror on the side of his motorcycle went crashing off, and the one guy got knocked over, and he looked like he was pretty banged up, and I was right behind them. And I pulled over, and I put my flashing lights on, and I walked over to the man. I could tell he was shaken up, and I asked him if he was okay. He looked bruised and a little bit battered, but he looked like he was going to be okay. And it all happened so quickly, and I asked him if I could help him, and he just asked me, could you help pick my motorcycle up, because they were in the middle of the street. You know, these bikes are heavy. I didn't realize how heavy they were. And then two of us both got down there, and I thought, I'm a 34-year-old man, I'll just lift this right up. But it was harder than I thought it would be. But I was able to lift it up for him. And he and his buddy, after standing there for 20 seconds, went on down the road. I don't know who they are. I didn't catch their name, and we both went on the rest of our days as though, we all had things to do. What are these treasures in heaven? We're not able to take any possessions with us. We're not able to take any things that we have accumulated with us. But we are able to take those moments in this life with us into the next world. We're able to take those good deeds with us into the next world. And I'm convinced that that moment that happened this last Monday will be one of those treasures that I'll get experience one day in heaven as I find myself standing with these two men, and they'll say, do you remember August 7th, 2019 when I got knocked over and you were there to pick me back up? Boy, that'll be one of my treasures. What other treasures in life can you store up? I think of Mother Teresa. And you think of a life where she had nothing. She lived in absolute poverty. But think of those treasures she's enjoying right now in heaven. All those children that she's helped. All those people's lives that she's impacted. Jesus tells us, store up treasures that do not fade away. Store up treasures that are eternal. That is the message that Jesus has for us. That is a message that is good. That is a message that is something that we can look forward to. And I know everybody standing here, we have treasures to look forward to one day. Let's keep storing them up. So when we see God face to face, we will marvel and celebrate in those treasures that God has waiting for us in heaven. Amen?